In a world where identity is often shaped by external forces, one African nation is reclaiming its roots, not with war, not with protest, but with fabric and pride. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has embarked on a quiet yet thunderous revolution. Colonial robes, once worn by its judges and elites, have been replaced by traditional African garments that speak to the soul of the continent. This isn't just about clothing, it's about liberation. Today, we explore how a simple change in attire has come to represent something far greater: a spiritual revolution, a return to self, and a loud declaration that Africa is ready to define itself on its own terms. To understand the weight of what's happening in Burkina Faso, we must first understand the weight of the past. Like much of West Africa, Burkina Faso was once under colonial rule. Known as Upper Volta during French colonization, its institutions, laws, and even its attire were modeled after European structures. The robes worn by its judges mirrored those of the French legal system, symbols of foreign control masked as order. But these symbols were never neutral. They carried the legacy of a legal system that rarely worked in favor of African people. They represented power, yes, but not African power. And for decades after independence, those symbols remained, almost like ghosts of a past that refused to be buried. Across the continent, post-colonial governments inherited more than just infrastructure. They inherited a way of thinking, a way of dressing, a way of existing that prioritized Western validation over African authenticity. But that tide is beginning to turn, and Burkina Faso is at the center of this cultural shift. Throughout history, revolutions have always been accompanied by new symbols: the red cap of the French Revolution, the kente cloth of Ghana's independence, the dashiki of the Black Power movement. Symbols are more than accessories. They are psychological warfare. They remind us who we are and who we were meant to be. In Burkina Faso, the judge's robe was a relic, a colonial uniform that whispered compliance. Replacing it with traditional Burkinabè attire wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a cultural reset. Imagine walking into a courtroom and seeing a judge dressed not in European black and white, but in a beautifully woven, locally crafted robe that reflects the heritage of the land. That image alone shifts the perception of justice from foreign to familiar. It says, "This system is ours now." When the images first surfaced, judges dressed in colorful traditional clothing, adorned with regional patterns and accessories, social media exploded. People were stunned, excited, emotional. It was more than a change in uniform. It was the visual manifestation of a cultural reawakening. Judges, once seen as distant, elite, and almost un-African, suddenly looked like the very people they served. The decision sparked national conversation. It reminded Burkinabè citizens that justice, governance, and leadership could be rooted in their own identity, not imported frameworks. Even the symbolism of the gavel took new meaning in this context. Now, justice was being administered not in mimicry of a foreign system, but in alignment with Burkinabè tradition and pride. Across Burkina Faso, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Many saw this change as part of a broader reclamation of self, something that goes far beyond fashion. Elders praised it. Youth shared it widely online. Cultural leaders called it revolutionary. Of course, there were skeptics. Some questioned whether clothing alone could solve deep systemic issues. But even critics admitted something had changed. A conversation had begun. And that's how revolutions start. Not always with violence, but with visibility. Citizens felt seen, heard, respected. And when people feel represented by their institutions, they begin to trust them again. This moment became more than news. It became a statement. Africa does not need to dress like its colonizers to be powerful, modern, or just. Burkina Faso's move did not go unnoticed. Across West Africa and beyond, leaders, activists, and artists began to discuss the significance of reclaiming cultural symbols. In Ghana, where traditional wear is already deeply embedded, the conversation turned to education. In Nigeria, calls grew louder for more Afrocentric courtrooms and parliaments. In Senegal, youth movements began promoting local fabrics over Western imports. Could this become a continental trend? Could clothing spark a broader cultural revolution across Africa? Pan-Africanism is not just about trade or defense, it's about shared identity. And what Burkina Faso has done is remind the continent that cultural liberation is the foundation of political freedom. Other African nations have flirted with similar ideas. Ethiopia has maintained many traditional garments within government settings. Rwanda promotes locally made fashion in parliament. South Africa's legal attire blends British and African elements. But few have taken as bold a stance as Burkina Faso, not just adapting tradition, but replacing colonial remnants entirely. This isn't about going backward, it's about moving forward, rooted in one's own soil. In a world where global culture often erases the local, Burkina Faso is reminding us, we can modernize without westernizing. But change is never easy. Burkina Faso still faces economic challenges, security concerns, and political pressure. Critics argue that symbolic changes, like robes, are a distraction from deeper issues. And, to an extent, they're right. A robe cannot feed the hungry or protect a village from violence, but symbols build unity, and unity fuels change. The question now is, will this cultural revolution translate into economic, judicial, and social transformation? Burkina Faso has shown that true power lies in authenticity, that when a people embrace their own culture, they become unstoppable. Captain Traoré may be a military leader, but his greatest battle is cultural, and he's winning it not with weapons, but with pride. As other nations watch closely, one thing is clear. Africa's rebirth will not be televised. It will be worn. Let this moment be a reminder that liberation comes in many forms, and sometimes the revolution begins with a robe.